good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? I'm your host, James Ransom Reed, Jr. Where were you on January 6th, 2021? 14 days before the inauguration of a new president. If you were like me and millions of other Americans, you were home watching your television screens in disbelief as America witnessed a spectacle that had never happened in our entire history. The capital of the United States was overrun by a mob. The building, which we hold in such reverence, was desecrated, windows were broken, furniture destroyed, not to mention various other acts that were created that day that we won't even talk about here. Policemen were injured. People were dedicated to killing the vice president and the Speaker of the House. We did not know how to feel, what to think, and why. As time has unfolded, we were given an opportunity to learn some of the facts behind one of the more disgraceful chapters in American history. My guest today has written a book. The book is called 2028, and it tells the story of a successful coup where legitimate, legally elected officials are removed from office, where our freedoms are one by one killed, where our Constitution is shredded. It's a fascinating story. You know, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope it makes you think. It can happen here. It almost did. My guest is author Dave Robbins. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate it.
It is a fascinating book about what could be.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. But before we get to that, would you tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself? You know, please tell us something about your background. Where were you born? Where did you go to school? That kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. I was born in Darien, Connecticut, and the lifestyle I was brought up in was sort of a mash between Mad Men and Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, my father was in advertising, so I was raised on hype, pretty much. And he was paid to do a lot of hype, which we're seeing a lot of lately, and I'm very, so I'm very aware of the hype that's going on about a lot of this thing. But I was growing up. I mean, it was all, Pepsodent toothpaste and, the Halo girl and that kind of thing. But as I got older, I went to high school.
Where'd you go to high school?
Well, it was actually, I was in a school in Vermont. It was kind of a progressive school, overnight, boarding school. And there we were taught to, really sort of, I wouldn't call it boot camp, but, it was really out in the wilds, and we did a lot of outward bound kind of stuff. And so it sort of molded, the idea was to mold us into, people of confidence, so we would have confidence. And, I only hope that some of what I'm doing today has come from that. But that was up in Craftsbury, Vermont.
Is it still there?
Mm-hmm. It's a college now. And they train people in farming and animal husbandry and that kind of thing. And you can get a degree in forestry, for instance. So it stayed with that concept, but it went from a sort of a boarding prep school, you might call it, to a full-blown college. And we go up there frequently. It's beautiful up there. And that being in Vermont is really what gave me, a love of the outdoors, which is why I've kind of, stayed in Simsbury. I've lived in New York, and I miss that very much. I haven't been there since before COVID, but I used to go in all the time. My wife and I had lived in Fairfield, Connecticut, which was an hour-long train ride to New York. I just hop on a train whenever I wanted to and take it to a museum and whatever. So I do miss the city, but I love the country. And it's quiet out here. It's safe. I love living in Connecticut. Connecticut to me is like the perfect environment. And we've got a nice sort of a degree of sophistication and understanding in Connecticut that it's hard to, nowadays, I have trouble seeing it on the outside. It's just a safe place to be, and I love it here.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. Before that, though, I went to a college in Atlanta, and that's when I started writing when I was about, I don't know, maybe 12 years old. I wrote my first novel when I was 16. I don't even know what that would read like now. But the thing is that I had a love of writing,
yes.
Novel writing especially. I started out writing plays. I used to get demerits in study hall because I was trying to, I was writing a play or something in my notebook. I was hiding it with a math book or something. So I knew then that I'd had a devotion to writing, the written word. And so I kind of started nurturing it back then. And so when I went to college in Atlanta, I did what all good writers should do. I majored in biology. But in the meantime, didn't do too well there because basically I really was sort of, instead of doing homework, still writing plays. I had my first couple of plays produced while I was in high school, which was a real honor for me. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. I was influenced then by Edward Albee, Eugene Ionesco, the Theater of the Absurd, the whole thing. And also, basically by David Mamet wasn't writing them, but I am influenced by him now. So so I carried that over, and it went into novel writing, more into prose. So when I didn't do well in Atlanta, where I went to college, because I really wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to be a biologist. I hated cutting up frogs. By the time I got home, I had my A1 notice waiting for me. It was right during Vietnam. So I managed to pull some strings and get into the Navy. And I served in the Navy for about 6 years. I was at sea during the Vietnam, the height of the Vietnam era. Mm-hmm. I didn't go in country, but what we were on a destroyer escort, and we were one of the newer destroyers in the Navy. And we actually had air conditioning, which is something was unheard of.
Yeah, it was unheard of.
Back in 1968 and 9.
Yeah.
So what we did was we went to these, kind of ports, these glamour ports in the Mediterranean, like Athens and, of course, Naples and Marseille and all these places, Riviera. And what happened was that because our ship its duty was to sort of take on some of these sailors who are experiencing difficulties in Vietnam, such as if you saw Apocalypse Now, those riverboat people.
Yes.
We'd take them, they were not sick enough to go home, but they were too sick for China Beach. Mm-hmm. So they'd send them to our ship for about, maybe a month or so they could rest and recuperate. And that was where I really learned more about the horrors of war. And not that I didn't know about it before, I knew about it from the standpoint of a protesting student back then. But then I saw the other side of it, which it isn't nearly as
glamorous
as all that.
Yeah,
and I basically that influenced me later to write a book called The Weight of Indifference, which is about a photographer photojournalist in Vietnam, and it covers those years from 1965 to 1969. So it really gave me an insight into that. people say, well, you did a lot of research with it. How do you do this? It wasn't research. It was all here. I remembered a lot of it.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And so that is, kind of the way I do. I generally write from, my shattered memory right now. But I really kind of enjoy doing that.
David, which of your parents had the most influence on you? Your mother, your father? Which one?
Good question. My mother was very left-brained. My father was the creative side. So I guess my father, he was a writer. He wanted to be a novelist himself.
Your father was a writer?
Yeah, well, he was a copywriter for Madison Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was exactly like the Mad Men thing. I mean, the scene that they have and the scenes they have in those books back in the 60s, it was very much what he was doing in his office,
Okay.
Yeah, keeping changes of white shirts and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, it was kind of a party environment. He enjoyed it. I remember having lots of parties in our houses. People don't do that anymore, but theme parties, like costume parties and all that thing.
Okay, yes.
And it would all be, they'd rotate houses, like 50 people would go to these things every week, and it would be a new Saturday night experience. So that was different back then. We don't have a life like that right now. But the thing is that I was kind of raised in that kind of environment where basically, it was fun, you might say, to an extent. But it was the 50s. And,
You have siblings?
I have two sisters. One, unfortunately, passed away a couple of years ago.
Sorry.
Still living, and she's now living in Bedford Hills. Bedford Hills, yeah, in near Greenwich and what have you, with her husband. And we basically, I was married once. That didn't work out too well either. But I made it last longer than it should have, and so I got out of that about 16 years later, and several years after that, maybe 10 years after that, actually, I met the wife I have now. And we've just been married for 30 years. So
congratulations.
Yeah, she's.
You want to give her a shout out?
Yeah, hi, Katie. She's good people. She really is. So it's been, it's the comfort zone has been pretty good around. And so, but as I say, we lived in Fairfield. We moved here to Simsbury about 2012, I think it was. So we've been here for over 10 years.
I understand you were born with a reading problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what was that all about, and how did it impact you?
They didn't have a diagnosis back then for dyslexia. They thought it was just a learning disability. And as a result, I was put into that's really kind of why I went to the school in Vermont, is because they dealt with a lot of kids that had this, the same problem I did. And so it wasn't necessarily a reading disability. It was more like a learning disability and a memory disability. And so I could have done better in school, but I think I was really limited by that. And it's funny now, it doesn't leave you. It stays with you through your life in various stages. And when I'm writing, I mean, I may flounder for words now when I'm speaking, but when I'm writing, it's almost as if it isn't. It's just like everything flows.
Floodgates open.
And it's like stutterers can sing, And I think that's what I find. That's why I found, writing to be a really great catharsis for, the kind of life I was leading, And so, yeah, it was, but I went to Rochester Institute of Technology after the Navy, and I studied photography. And I love photography. I realized that, writing comes from outward. Photography comes like inward, so you can show it out. Photography is something you do in the moment. Writing is something you plan to do, and you form a story. You take a shot, and it's there. And it's either good or it's bad, but you throw away the bad ones. But I learned to really love photography. So after, I don't know, I would say a 25-year hiatus. I mean, I've been taking pictures all along. I really decided a couple of years ago to get back involved with it again. So I built a studio in my home. I do portraits, commercial
Yes.
photography. I do fashion, and I'm sort of picking up where I left off. And now I'm getting into doing collages, but compilations of surreal stuff. So I'm started getting into surreal photography, which is a real art.
You know, David, you come from a family of writers. Your grandfather wrote also, did he not?
My grandfather wrote, he was a novelist, and he wrote horror stories. His claim to fame was The Unholy Three, which was made into both a silent film and a talkie. The talkie starring Lon Chaney, which was his first foray into film, and he became fast friends with my grandfather.
Mr. Chaney did?
Yeah.
Wow.
Todd Robbins. And he wrote The Unholy Three. He wrote, he was kind of behind the scenes, but he wrote the basic script for Freaks, which is kind of a cult classic right now. And so he had a sense of the macabre. And his books actually did pretty well. As a matter of fact, he went to France and lived in Montparnasse for a while, which was near Luxembourg Gardens. And there he was kind of already likened to, an up-and-coming writer, like another writer living there named Ernest Hemingway. And heard of him, yeah. Well, Granddad didn't quite make the cut, but Hemingway did. He lived the kind of life that one would expect one would live. He knew Gertrude Stein, he knew Hemingway, he knew F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, they would hang out together, and that would have been Paris in the mid-20s. And so it was kind of a bizarre life.
Your father would have been exposed. This was your father's father? Or
Yeah, it's my father's father. And my dad mostly, he just spent a lot of time playing tennis, I think, as a kid.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't writing then.
Okay.
He was a late bloomer when it came to writing. So he was sort of living a life with his grandfather in Long Island. Unfortunately, my father and my grandfather were kind of estranged from one another. And my grandfather passed away about 2 weeks after I was born. And so I never had a chance to meet him. But his life was fascinating enough. I wrote, Boxing with Hemingway about him. And that starts a series that takes place in Europe in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And this is the first one, and it's about a writer struggling to get by during that time.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And it's a lot to do with my life, too. It's kind of, we're living in very creative times right now, but it's a different kind of creativity. But back then, it was a novel creativity, too. It was the jazz age, and women had the right to vote in America, not yet in France. They basically, women were expressing themselves, thanks in part to Zelda Fitzgerald. But they were basically, people were coming into their own individual beings. And so, I wrote, that book was about him, and the other two include him as well.
So, David, tell the audience, right, what is it about writing that captivates you? What is it about writing before we get to 2028? What is it that grabs you and holds you and will not let you go?
Well, all writers have the same and a different answer to that one.
All right.
The answer, writing, as I said, was a catharsis. And it's a way to almost live vicariously through your characters. And it's something like script writers are the same way. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit it. People who write have like sort of uninteresting lives, but when you write, you can put your character. They can be a circus clown for anything. But writing is a way for me to cope, and I love doing it. And I love building a story. I love it when the characters take over.
For you to cope. Wow.
Yeah. Well,
what are you
writing is a
coping?
coping mechanism.
Oh, it is. Okay. I would think
whatever this situation.
I would think imagination would have to be a major factor.
Oh yeah, imagination in the photography and in the writing plays a huge, huge deal. You've got to have that. You've got to have a sense of creativity, but imagination. Yeah, there are two types of writers. There are pantsers and plotters. Plotters are the ones that have sticky notes everywhere, like this happens in this chapter, this happens, blah blah blah, and they have a very strict formula that they follow. Pantsers, which is what I am pretty much, are the people that write by the seat of their pants. You come up with an idea, you write a chapter. Okay, you build the next chapter on that one, the next chapter on that. And basically, suddenly, you're living a wonderful life, or maybe not so wonderful if you're writing, something that's not so wonderful about a character who isn't so wonderful. But the thing is that writing is a great catharsis, and it's a great form of expression. To me, anything creative. Photography is the same way for me.
Yes.
So I really do both of those things for the same reason. Now, there are certain writers that that have influenced me. Of course, the top of the list is Hemingway, and the other, Anthony Doerr, All the Things We Cannot See. Christian Hanna, who wrote Morning Star, basically Emmett Tolles, Evelyn Waugh. So I mix the classics with the new ones. But these are the people that kind of inspire my writing. And there's probably many more on my list I forget to mention. But part of it is, as far as movie writers, I like Hitchcock, because he had a way of building a scene that writers can learn from, If you watch a Hitchcock movie, you can see how it develops, how the characters develop and the suspense develops, and a writer can apply that to his novel writing skills as well. So So I write because I love it.
There you go. There you go. I write because I love it.
Yeah.
What we have done with the first part of this interview is give our audience a view into you as a writer, as a man, as a person, and your historical experiences and how you overcame dyslexia to write. I believe you said it's like sitting down and the floodgates open and I can write. It doesn't bother me, dyslexia. Well, there are people out there with dyslexia who would love to hear that and understand that and who can identify with that. So the first part of this interview has been to get you to talk about Dave and who Dave is so that we can really get a firm understanding of 2028 and what motivated you to sit down and write 2028. You heard in my intro that I said America awoke on January 6, 2021 to a spectacle we had never seen before. So we had no idea how to react to that. Or most of us, well, I'm sorry, let's not use the indefinite pronoun most. Let's say a good number of us were shocked. That would be fair. A good number of us were shocked because we hadn't seen anything like that. And we had been used to, as Americans, we go to the polls, we vote, the winner goes to the office that we elected, and the loser goes home. We had been used to that. That was our strength.
Yeah.
And it what set us apart. And then we saw the mob, and we saw the destruction, and we saw the anger, and we saw the hatred, and we saw the violence on a massive scale on a place that we revered, and Americans simply could not, we couldn't fathom that right away. So what I'm very pleased with is the second part of this interview is going to get into 2028 so people can understand, like I said in my intro, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. That's the price of freedom. You can't ever take your hand off the lever because when you do, these things happen. And being a history person yourself, you do know a bit about other countries and how it starts and how it ends. So I found the story fascinating. I'm not going to give away anything. I'm not going to steal your thunder.
Happening now.
My guest has been David Robbins, author of the book 2020. It's a story about what could happen in this nation if we are not vigilant and stand up and fight for our freedoms. My name is James Ransom Reed Jr. I'm the host of What's Your Story? Everybody has a story. What's yours? Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Good night.
Hi, I'm Jay McCormick, a board director at Nutmeg TV, your local public TV station right here in Farmington. Nutmeg TV has been an integral part of our community for over 30 years, providing a platform for residents to share stories, voice concerns, and celebrate achievements. It's a vital resource that connects us all, bringing countless local events to our TV screens. The topics are limitless and vary from being aware of scams to veterans helping veterans. Nutmeg TV continues to be here for the community. To continue this important work, we're asking for your support through a donation. Your contribution will ensure that Nutmeg TV remains a robust and relevant resource for our community. Thank you for supporting Nutmeg TV. Together, we can continue to amplify the voices and stories that make our community unique and vibrant.
To make a donation, simply visit our website at nutmegtv.com or call the office at 860-321-7405 for assistance.